On today's episode of the Locked On Knicks podcast, I'm joined by DJ Zullo of Knicks Film School to discuss if a Tom Thibodeau coach team can ever have a championship level offense.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's up, guys? My name is Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster, a credentialed NBA media member, and, of course, the Saturday co-host of the Locked On NBA podcast. I want to remind you, you are watching Locked On Knicks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your daily podcast on the New York Knicks, giving you the most detailed insight on your favorite team 5 days a week. And be sure to join thousands of other Knicks fans in subscribing on both YouTube and your favorite podcast platform for the best insight on your favorite team every single day. But if that's not enough for you, if you are a real basketball sicko, we want to remind you that your favorite podcast now has a newsletter. That's right, we're introducing Locked On Knicks daily newsletter, one-stop shop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com, and start your day with the all-new free Locked On Knicks newsletter. You get writing from Alex and I, our fantastic team of national writers here at Locked On, and of course, Josh Lloyd, giving you the tips you need to win your fantasy basketball league year in and year out. On today's show, once again, joined by DJ Zullo, and we're going to talk about if Tom Thibodeau is maximizing the Knicks offense. A little bit of a spoiler here. He is not. What has to be done to maximize the Knicks offense, and Mikal Bridges, why is it not really working out for him in big games? We get into all that and more right now on Locked On Knicks. All right, guys, as promised, we are lucky enough to be joined by our good friend DJ Zullo, film analyst over at Knicks Film School. DJ, rough few days to be a Knicks fan, to be doing this for a living. How are you holding up, man? How are you doing?
Pretty good, I guess, despite it all. I felt after the second Boston game a bit of a resignation about where the team was and didn't have high hopes leading into these two games. So I was obviously hoping for a better showing, maybe competitive losses at, the worst. But yeah, I felt after them sort of the same boat in terms of like they're clearly a very good team and like literally the fourth or fifth best team in the NBA that just has a very clear ceiling right now that I just don't think, at least this year, they can overcome that.
Yeah, I think I was in a very similar place where I was hopeful it would be better. And then there was the Cleveland game. I was frustrated. After the Boston game, I was a little more accepting, and you almost you feel almost a little worse on some level when that apathy leaks in. It doesn't hurt that much. You're like, no, this should hurt. we should win a championship this year. But that is sort of where I want to open up, because I've in the past been very harsh on Tom Thibodeau. And I look back on podcasts I was doing, especially during that 21-22 season. I'm like, you know what? Like, I think I was too harsh on the guy at times, because there's obviously so many good things he brings to the table. And you look at how magical last season was, and I think everything he has instilled from a cultural perspective was essential to having, at least in my fandom, along with that 12-13 team, the most memorable team in my Knicks lifetime. But I also think now there are very reasonable questions about just how high he can get the Knicks ceiling. And I was really excited that it worked out that I got to talk to you today, because I know just listening to you and Benji on the pod last week and listening to you over the year, and correct me if I'm off on this, I think you are both like a little bit more mindful than I've been in the past of like, here are the good things Tom Thibodeau brings to the table. Here are the things that like the average fan maybe doesn't take for granted that he brings to the table. And I want to make sure when I'm coming out here and doing this podcast and being like, yeah, I think it's time to move on for this guy, I'm not being too harsh on him. But where I want to start on that front is the offensive personnel and maximizing it, because to me, that is the most obvious glaring area where I see room for improvement in a potential new head coach. And you look at what Kenny Atkinson has done in Cleveland and finding a way to maximize Evan Mobley and Jared Allen as a more creative offensive mind than JB Bickerstaff, where those two together were like a net neutral last year. And this year, they're like one of the most dominant two-man combos in the NBA. Look at what Taylor Jenkins has done in Memphis, and these teams that like maybe don't even necessarily have the offensive personnel. I wouldn't put Cleveland in that category that the Knicks have, or have like similar or greater spacing concerns in terms of having one true non-shooter on the floor, and yet find a way to field these incredible offenses that don't seem to die in the same way the Knicks do when confronted with one of these three defenses, whether it's Cleveland, whether it's Boston, whether it's Oklahoma City. So I say that all as a long-winded prelude to, do you think Tom Thibodeau is maximizing the Knicks' offensive personnel? And if we can agree that that's maybe an easy question and he's not, how far off is he? And do you think there are maybe younger coaches who embrace different tenets that could do that a lot more effectively?
Well, just to back up, I guess, before the year, when in terms of how I viewed this season in regards to Thibodeau, and I said often this is the most important year of his coaching career, and the pressure on him to maximize this team was imperative. And while I understand the notion that there is a bit of a window here, 2-3 years that this team could get to and win a championship, I thought, based on Jalen Brunson's prime, Josh Hart's prime, Bridges, Cat, it's not okay just to say, yeah, this is a stepping stone, or the year that we're going to maybe find out where we need to tweak to get to that point. So I'm while I've been a huge defender of his, I also acknowledge that he has to maximize things, and he has to start doing it this season, because 2 to 3 years, that window closes quicker than you think. And I said it after the Boston game, if the front office is not having questions about their coach, then they're not doing their job. And I think that's completely fair. Now, the point about Atkinson is a good one, because it was during that game where it sort of was crystal clear to me of what a head coach could do. And, we've seen, whether it's Atkinson, I know he hasn't won yet, but he's clearly made massive changes to empowering Mobley, empowering Ty Jerome even to be, he's one of the best six men in the NBA, to getting Donovan Mitchell to buy into a lesser role. So he's clearly doing things to get them to a championship caliber level. And then we've seen a guy like Steve Kerr do that, where he takes a team that's very talented and he maximizes and changes the structure of how they operate to really utilize the talents on his roster. So there is that perspective, and I think that's completely reasonable. And I am not sure that Tom Thibodeau on the offensive end is maximizing his talent, because I think there are things that you are seeing here that maybe is more of a team building issue, because I watch Mikal Bridges play, and while I'm also one to say third option on our team, you basically didn't show up to any of these games against these elite teams to the level of where we need you, considering that Brunson and Towns, there's reason why the way they are getting offense against these great teams, the switching nature of it is just going to make their offense harder to generate, not as clean, not as easy. So you need a third option there to really provide that ability to get you to stay at least close to your normal level. And I don't know why Bridges hasn't lived up to that, but I can look at things of whatever the shot change was, it's rendered his above the break 3-point shooting a complete disaster right now. I mean, he'll make a few, but it's not a reliable weapon anymore. You look at Anunoby, you see the deficiencies as a ball handler, as a creator, another one who cannot reliably make an above the break shot. Josh Hart, the same thing. So while I think there would be an argument to be made that inserting Deuce McBride into the starting lineup, now I'm different than I think the conventional wisdom, in the sense that I think Bridges is the one that should not be starting, and that McBride starting in the Bridges place is actually, and I've kind of been on that for several weeks now. That to me
I've been talking about that a lot too. So I'm happy to hear you bring that up. Yeah.
So that it just makes the most sense to me. You are replacing your point of attack defender with a better one. You're actually gaining a floor spacer. You're not losing the defensive rebounding aspect of Josh Hart, which I think is critical to keeping this defense above water. If maybe, I don't even know if they can be considered to be above water right now, but the fact that they can defensive rebound is one of the things they can sort of hold their head on. So I think moving in a different direction within the starting lineup is completely warranted. And I think most coaches a month ago would have made an adjustment there. And then in terms of just like X's and O's things, in that regard, I think this is just the fact that it always usually goes back to like, is the shot quality at the level where you can compete with some of these teams that are just shooting an immense amount of 3-pointers, Boston being like number one, but Cleveland, similar in that regard in terms of their shot making. I look at the Knicks, I'm like, who's the high volume 3-point shooter that you can rely on right now? I don't think it's Anunoby. I don't think it's Bridges. Brunson he's a great shooter, but if he's not stepping into a pull up, he doesn't really have another way to generate the threes at a level that's going to be 7 or 8 per game. And then Towns, while he's upped his threes recently over the past several games, just is not, especially if you take away the pick and pop, is not a guy that you're going to rely on to be a huge 3-point driver in terms of the attempts. So I think in that regard, I think it's more personnel based. But in terms of rotation and starting lineup, that's where I think Tibbs is maybe falling a little short.
All right, guys, next with DJ, we're going to talk about the one adjustment the Knicks need to make to potentially save their offense this season against the best teams in the league, and what's going wrong for Mikal Bridges. We get into all that next on Locked On Knicks. But first, we want to tell you about some of our newest friends here at Locked On over at DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready. They swoosh, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. It's simple. When any player scores 50 or more in a game during the 24-25 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order, up to $10 off the next day from noon to midnight. Here are a few ways you can take advantage of this deal. A game day feast. After an epic 50-point performance, celebrate by ordering wings, pizza, or burgers from your favorite spot delivered straight to your door. Late night cravings, whether you're staying up and watching highlights or just need a midnight snack, use Dash Pass to grab something delicious while saving big. And lunch on the go. Need a quick and easy lunch the next day with Dash Pass. You can get your favorite meals with $0 delivery fees and reduced service fees. Plus, now you save even more with this exclusive NBA offer. Sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save when any player scores 50 or more in a game. Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day, up to $10 off. Just use promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game. Uneligible orders at participating merchants. Must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. Yeah, I think I want to hit this real quick, and then I kind of had a different point off that. Deuce McBride, for his career, first season, the Knicks shot 1% more threes when he was on the court. That was 61st percentile in the NBA. Second year, 3%, 80th percentile. Last season, 4.4% more threes, 90th percentile this year. They shoot 6.5% more threes, 95th percentile when he's on the court. So to me, he's that guy as a starter since 23-24. He's gotten up 9 threes a game. That number is boosted maybe a little artificially by the fact that he's played just an insane 43 minutes per game as a starter. It's like Tom Thibodeau does not start him unless he has no other option. But when he starts him, he really starts him. He just does not come off the court. And I know some of that was just the crazy injuries last year, but I found that statistic wild. And he's been fantastic this again since 23-24 as a starter. 18 points, 4 assists, 3 rebounds, 46, 41, 88 splits, and as I mentioned, shooting threes on volume. And where I look at his impact the most in these games, and I think you can zoom in, and I'll let you go off on this because I know you did a whole breakdown of the Celtics game. I'm sure zoomed in on this particular aspect a lot, but the impact he had on the Knicks in the third quarter. And watching that first half, what I kept coming back to was Jalen Brunson in particular, and Cat, at least against the Cavs, if not against the Celtics, despite the switching and despite the fact that those teams have elite defensive personnel, they are still able, Brunson again more so than Cat, able to get their own, right? Like Jalen is such an incredible creator and shot maker in a phone booth. Like you could have Jaylen Brown switched onto him. And I look back, not necessarily this game, but 2 games ago, Brunson was hitting tough shot after tough shot over Jaylen Brown. But where this offense just totally breaks down for me is you just see 4 other guys watching, and you get into what the playoff offense was in 22-23, what the playoff offense was for substantial stretches in 23-24, which is like, hey, Jalen, go create magic against a great defense and probably a bigger, longer, more athletic defender when there's 2 or 3 guys potentially locked in on you. But I think the grander point there is Boston does not really feel a need to double. And they're saying like, hey, you want to go cook against a great defender? That's fine. We don't think you can be efficient enough to beat us when we're going to have an obscenely good offense on the other end of the floor, just relying on Jalen Brunson to do that. And my next thought off of that was, all right, is that a Jalen Brunson flaw, that he's more the 5th to 10th best player in the league versus someone like a Luka Doncic, like a Nikola Jokic, that is just going to generate doubles no matter what the defense is and how good they are? And then I watched that third quarter, and I have what maybe should be an obvious revelation, but when you get Deuce McBride out there, or last season when you had Dante DiVincenzo, as we talked about in one of the preseason pods we did, spacing out 26, 27, 28 feet, not only do you have like that extra room to operate and that shooting, like it just gives Jalen enough space to actually create an advantage that necessitates, if not a double, at least like a stunt in his direction or a step the other way. And it feels like that opens up ball movement for the entire rest of the offense for both him and Cat. I'll cut myself off there. Is that something you've noticed too? Because to me, that is just sort of the passive impact of having someone like Deuce McBride on the floor. And even on a night where he goes 1 for 7, has 2 points, where I think he still has a pretty dramatic impact that I don't know if box score numbers necessarily capture.
Sure. And because you look at his 3-point shooting is down this year based on just the raw numbers, but the impact is still there because teams really respect him. And it goes back to and it's just critical. You need above the break spacing as much as anything, because, you know, if Cat and Brunson are involved in the action, the Knicks literally do not have a starter that you could space in like the opposite wing. If you're running like an angle pick and roll where it's like the corners are filled, Brunson and Cat are in like the left wing, and then you have one spacer on the opposite wing. So that puts like a defender in a position to either stunt to prevent Brunson or Cat from rolling to the rim, or they're hugging that shooter, and then you have a lot more space. If it's Bridges and Anunoby, you can really, load up and help, and then have a one direction closeout and feel good that you can get out there and at least impact the shot, especially because they're not going to be spacing 28 feet away. Now, Deuce is not he's not a DiVincenzo level shooter from that sort of distance, but he's still respected in a way that the other 3 Knicks starters that I'm talking about just are not. So
I think part of it is that he's just a more willing shooter.
He's a more willing shooter. Yeah. I mean, you look at Benji tweeted Josh Hart's 3-point attempts have gone down literally month over month. And we know he's rarely a willing shooter unless there's a playoff game on the line from above the break. And then he'll shoot it and figure out a way to make it. But it's usually corner. And same with Bridges and Anunoby. That's of all the flaws this team has that are fundamental that you just aren't going to fix, you have to mask or figure out a way to mitigate. The fact that they are so limited shooting above the break in terms of their ancillary role players is like a real critical issue right now. And I don't think, I didn't give it enough credence leading into the year because I assumed swapping Bridges for DiVincenzo, you're just gaining so much more on the defensive end. And you're gaining so much in terms of overall offensive versatility that it was going to make up for the fact that DiVincenzo is just a elite floor spacer, and Bridges is just like a competent one that has other skills to maybe, still be a better offensive player. But you wonder in terms of like his fit with this team, if like a DiVincenzo level offensive player just makes more sense. And I think that's something where, you don't know it until you see it. That's like the team building part of it. I don't know. I would put on Thibodeau. I think that's more of like, how this team was built, and if it was, everyone maximizing each other.
What do you think I was going to save this for later, but let's get into it. What do you think the primary misevaluation on Bridges was? Obviously, you mentioned the fact that the above the break 3 disappeared, because it's funny that you brought up your preseason thoughts. I went back and listened to our preseason pod because you came on to do the Mikal Bridges preview, and you were talking about his ability to attack closeouts, and that was my source of optimism as well. So certainly buoyed by our conversation on where I was like, this is a team that is constantly gonna have defenses in rotation, and it would mirror that environment that he had on the Suns, where you looked at him and like, not that the rim volume, I should probably pull it up, was ever incredible, but like he was like a monster at the rim, and I'm sure a lot of that was in transition, but it was because he could attack closeouts, and it didn't matter necessarily that he's not like a one-on-one like cook you type of offensive player. It was because he was so decisive and so smart, like he could beat a closeout and then like get to the rim and finish at a high rate, or like draw two and then swing it. And there's still some of that there. It's just, as we noted, like against these great defenses, that much harder to get them in rotation. And if you don't have the right personnel out there to maximize that and make life as easy as possible for Brunson and Cat, like it feels like his offense has died. And then there is just what really gets at me, and I think a lot of Knicks fans with Mikal, is there is like, I'm trying to think of the right word for it. I don't know if it's as simple as like you want to use the Clydism of fire and desire, but like compared to Dante, who is just such a competitor and doesn't nearly have Mikal's physical gifts in terms of his length, but and like historically is not a great finisher, but just would like violently attack the basket when the Knicks were struggling early in a game. And to your point, like I go back to these games where the Knicks are just getting blown out and he's scoreless in 32 minutes against the Thunder. 4 points in the first half of the second Celtics game, 4 points in the first half against the Cavs, 2 points through three quarters yesterday. And I'm like, where is just like the frustration and the anger for this guy? And like part of that you could say is like a cultural issue, but I look at it just as like purely an offensive issue of like at a certain point, they just need to be able to throw him the ball. And like, even if it's him settling for like a fadeaway, like he's an elite mid-range shot maker. Like we saw it in that San Antonio game. We've seen it of the first game against the Thunder. Like he can get to spots, he can rise up, he can score the basketball. And I know Boston is just as better defenders and is physical and like those wings are overwhelming for him at times. But I just don't get how there's no volume there and there's no aggressiveness. And I don't know, is that a misevaluation by the front office on who he is? Is it the context of the guys around him? Or is that on Tom Thibodeau, like just not like calling specific sets for him and like forcing momentum into him shooting the basketball?
Yeah, because it's funny because you look at his, like the first year he went to New Jersey, he's averaged close to 7 free throws per game, which is insane to think about based on him. He's averaging about one this year.
Here's a good stat for you. He's taken, I think, 1 free throw now in the 7 games against these teams.
Well, that's makes complete sense, but it's wild even considering that. And then, you know, part of it is there's less opportunity for him because Brunson and Cat are being played straight up. Cat will get doubled in the post, but you know, those have just not materialized in the opponent being in clear rotation. There's a lot to consider there. I think empowering him a little more seems to be the most low-hanging fruit of all the things we're talking about, because you know, the player in Brooklyn, I don't know what their offensive rating was. So they might have only been like an average, maybe even below average offense with him taking the amount of shots and having the usage that he had. But he showed the ability to at least crack a defense, get into the paint at a pretty consistent level. There's been games, especially in the Atlanta matchups, where it was mind-boggling that he wasn't prioritized in a more clear way based on Trae Young having so many defensive reps guarding him. So I think there is something to the fact that if you empowered him more, maybe there is more to tap into. But in terms of like the personality, the lack of aggression, I think that's showing up on both sides of the floor defensively. While it's gotten better than the early part of the year, I still feel like there's just a lack of moments where the defense actually feels his presence. And then you sort of like juxtapose that with McBride, and you see a guy that's, you know, he's more of a bulldog and more of a, I'm not going to be screened on this play. And I showed a few of those clips from the second half in that game against Boston, where he just got around a couple of screens, blocked Derek White for one, forced a tough Jaylen Brown shot on another, like clearly showing a different level of aggression. And it sort of puts a highlight onto what the issues are for Bridges on both sides. And I think there probably is a personality thing that maybe was masked by the fact that Phoenix was such a great team and he really was sort of like fit in perfectly with how they were operating. And then obviously Brooklyn didn't have a lot to play for, and it's being exposed now. But I think there's probably still more you can extract from him. But I think it's tough when you have Cat and you have Brunson. So it's not going to be consistent, but I think it's something they can maybe go to a little more to force the action from him a little bit.
Yeah, the rim rate has just been going the wrong direction for a while. Like it was just in terms of shot frequency, he was his first 3 years in the NBA all above 70th percentile, peaked his second year, he was 87th percentile. Last 3 years, 30th, 23rd this season, all the way down to 21st. And then the free throw rate, to your point, that run on Brooklyn, he was 14% of his field goal attempts resulted in free throws. 85th percentile in the NBA this year. 3.7% of his field goal attempts have resulted in free throws. 11th percentile in the NBA. And then defensively, like his foul rate is extremely low, which I think some people would see that and be like, oh, great. Like he defends without fouling. Like I'd take a stupid foul or two every game where he just ragdolls someone just to like get him into the game. And you look at the fact that he hasn't missed,
real quick on that.
Yeah.
That's a Thibodeau thing. And that's where I think he talks about the Knicks are a low foul team. Like he'll say that in his post game, especially when they have a game where they come in more fouls than he thought they actually did. He'll say that we're a low foul team. So I'm going to, I'll send in the tape. He really prides himself on the Knicks not fouling a lot. And you wonder if that's sort of, the diminishing returns of that is really hitting him because, it's great to be a low foul team. I don't think there's a strong correlation between being low foul and having a low defensive rating. So I don't know if that's something he is maybe over emphasizing, to your point, because I think there's a point where you can obviously foul too little and have that, and have too a little of a physicality effort. And I think that's something you don't normally assign to a Thibodeau team, but I felt that this year a few times.
Yeah. And I just look at the fact that he's played every game in his career. And that was kind of the shining badge of honor when he came in. And it's an incredible accomplishment. We've seen him turn his ankle and then just Terminator style, just snap it back into place and keep like I cannot emphasize enough that he is a physical marvel. And yet at the same time, I'm realizing now, like, it almost takes his lack of physicality for that to happen because he's just playing NBA basketball, crashing into 250-pound guys going speeds that should not be feasible for humans that defy physics. At some point you should get hurt. And the fact that he never has, it's more of a concern than a badge of honor for me. All right, guys, that is going to wrap up part 1 with DJ, but part 2 comes out tomorrow morning, where we are going to continue down this same topic, a couple more thoughts on the offense and whether it is actually feasible that Tom Thibodeau can make the adjustments necessary for this team to win big. And then on the defensive side of the ball, is it on Tom Thibodeau or is it on Leon Rose for how he constructed this team? We'll get into all that tomorrow on Locked On Knicks. Until then, be good, and we'll talk to you soon.